Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 3, Episode 8, The Tape. Hi, how's everyone doing? I'm doing pretty well. I'm so sorry you had to listen to that. That was my attempt at a sexy voice. I'm not JLD, not even close. But there you have it. I tried. My kids are on fall break. It's a thing here in Colorado. I had never heard of fall break before, but from what I understand, because people want to go to the mountains so much here in Colorado, they give all the kids a fall break at this time of year. It always seems so soon for me, and it just sneaks up on us, so we really never plan anything. So we're doing some fun things locally. Took the kids on a hike at Red Rocks earlier this week. And yesterday we took them to this new place called Meow Wolf. Now, some of you out there might have heard of this. It's how do I describe Meow Wolf? It's sort of this huge art installation where you can go and touch and walk through and interact with all of these artful displays. I'm not doing a great job describing it, but there are 3 in the US and one is here. It's the newest one. It just opened a couple of months ago. We went to the one in Santa Fe, which was an amazing experience. And the third one is in Las Vegas. So if you find yourself in any of those cities, I highly recommend going to Meow Wolf and experiencing it. It's indescribable, as you could see. I described it very poorly, but it's such an interesting experience. And it's not just for kids. You know, we took our kids there, but it's really for all ages, I believe. So make a point to go if you are ever in Las Vegas, Denver, or Santa Fe. All right, let's get into this episode. The synopsis for The Tape in my coffee table book is as follows. A mystery woman who left an erotic message on Jerry's tape recorder turns out to be Elaine. Her dirty-mouthed practical joke spurs sexual interest in her from the guys, especially George, who has coincidentally ordered a miracle baldness cure from China. Kramer decides to retrieve the jacket, which makes him irresistible to women. This episode is written by Larry David, Bob Shaw, and Dawn McHenry. All right, so we start out in Jerry's apartment. Jerry's fridge is being repaired. There's a repairman there, sort of bothering Jerry with a lot of details. Something about, you got some discoloration and you don't want to disturb the position of the compressor. Jerry's doing something else. He's just trying to shut this guy up. Yeah, whatever you got to do. George enters. He notices Jerry's listening to a tape and he says, yeah, I taped my show from last night. I was doing some new material, so I'm just listening to this tape. And George asks if he did the bit he came up with called the coup d'etat, where the second toe outgrows the big toe. There's a power struggle. Yeah, Jerry did it. Nothing at all. Then George asks to use the phone to call China. China, really? What for? For hair. The Chinese have done it, my friend. The Chinese have done it. And the bald fridge repairman knows exactly what he's talking about. Did you see that last night? It was on CNN. So there's this miracle bald cure from China. And of course, George wants to try this out. Kramer enters. He's got a camera and he got it from his friend Spectre. We heard about Spectre a couple of episodes ago in the parking garage. Now, this was the guy who had a fat fetish. He's telling George about how he never dated a woman who weighed less than 250 pounds. And Jerry points out the irony that this man who is becoming a minimalist, because he's giving everything away, that's how Kramer got the camera, has a fat fetish. Doesn't that conflict? Kramer looks at George and says, you know what you should have watched last night, CNN. And he's like, I did. I'm trying to call China. Well, you can't call China now. It's like 3 a.m. there. All of a sudden, Jerry starts reacting to something on his tape recorder. He's just in disbelief, and he tells them, there's this woman on my tape recorder. She's talking to me while I'm on stage. This is wild. Passes it to George, passes it to Kramer. Oh my gosh, it's so erotic, and they just can't believe what they're hearing. And of course, we have to end the scene with Kramer putting the volume way too high and freaking out. All right, the next scene, we're in Monk's. George and Jerry enter, and they're having a little bit of a debate about the Chinese bald cure. Jerry's very skeptical. George believes it. He needs to believe it. This is what he thinks is going to save him from his baldness. They see Elaine. She's sitting at the booth. And Jerry says, tell her about it. Well, George completely confuses what he's talking about and says, well, Jerry got this really sexy message. Elaine kind of clocked that a little bit. And Jerry's like, no, the bald cure. We were talking about the bald cure. And then Jerry gets called over by Beater, a friend of his. And so Jerry leaves. And Elaine asks about this message. Can you tell me about it? And, oh, this woman had us going out of our minds. Oh, really? Sexy? Well, like, how'd she sound? She had this sort of throaty, sexy kind of whisper. And behind George's menu, Elaine leans in and does the voice because it was Elaine. She had stopped in the club and saw the tape recorder and got this impulse. Oh, George can't believe it. That was you. She is just so amused and so proud of herself. She asks George, just keep this a secret, okay? I want to have a little fun with this. Well, George is immediately, thoroughly distracted by this. He tells her, I had no idea you were filled with such sexuality. She just brushes it off. Jerry returns. And the entire time, you can tell George just can't take his eyes off of Elaine. He's still processing what she just told him. He just is in such disbelief. Elaine brings it back. So what about this girl in your tape recorder? And Jerry just says, oh, Elaine, what do you think an enraptured female fan of mine might say? And she says, I don't know. She went on in some detail about certain activities, illegal in some states, for consenting adults, things you know very little about. This type of thing is very common in show business. I love the little look she gives George when he says, things you know very little about. And she says, well, what are you going to do? You're going to ask her out? She didn't leave her number. Oh, well, that's too bad. Then Elaine says, I got to go, guys. And George, with this newfound sort of pull to Elaine, says, what are you going home for? Well, I just came from the gym. Unless I can shower at your place, Jerry. He says, fine. Well, George can't take that. He's got to blot his head with the ice water. That's a lot to take. So the purpose of this scene, it establishes that Elaine was the woman on Jerry's tape and that George is adamant about ordering this bald cure from China. He believes in it. All right, my take. I love everything about Elaine in this scene and how she is presented. So this whole episode is about seeing Elaine in a different way. The men see Elaine in this episode, ultimately, all of them. They see her differently. And right away, we as the audience see her differently from the first scene. I think that's so effective. So like right away, we see her in Monks. Her hair is down in a low ponytail. There's no wall of hairstyle. And that in itself is sort of jarring. We haven't seen Elaine in this sort of relaxed, kind of more playful hairdo, if I could say it in that way. It's always been in that wall of hair, clipped up. Plus, she's in her gym wear, which is totally different from the boxy shoulder padded blazers and all that kind of those little prairie dresses she wears, the floral dresses. She's in this kind of tight fitting gym wear. So right off the bat, we are seeing a totally different Elaine, which is in essence what this whole episode is about. And I love that. And even in her demeanor, there is a relaxed vibe to her in this scene. It's nothing overt or even uncharacteristic, but it's subtle. And, therein lies the genius of JLD. I mean, she is still wholly Elaine. There's nothing about her performance in this scene or in this episode where we're like, okay, this is a stretch. They're really kind of trying to make Elaine something she's not. All we're doing here is we're being introduced to a new side of Elaine. And it's a side I like to call sexy, scheming Elaine. She's sexy, she's scheming, and she's still Elaine. The part where Jerry gets called over by Beater, it's always felt a little clunky and odd to me. I mean, I know they needed a way for Jerry to leave the table so that George and Elaine could be alone together and she can reveal, that she was the one on the tape. But the random guy calling him over, and then sort of the lame story when Jerry comes back, it's just not effective. Like we were at the racetrack and he was yelling at this jockey, and it's very lame. I just thought they could have done a little bit, like they could have just made Jerry go to the bathroom. I don't know. It just seemed unnecessary to have Beater be a character. Elaine's reveal to George is just so genius to me. You can tell she's holding something in. And then when she finally does her sexy voice behind the menu and sits back, so happy with herself, arms just resting on the back of the booth, that smile, it's so delicious. Everything about that, I love it. And George's immediate shift in his demeanor towards Elaine is just so well played by Jason Alexander. Very believable. He probably had some vision of the type of woman on the tape already, right? Like George probably was imagining probably something a little bit more stereotypical, a woman in lingerie, a little, very made up or something like that. And now all of that has been reapplied to Elaine. And he's, he can't get that out of his head. And at the same time, I love the two viewpoints here. So George is really just now he's becoming sexually attracted to Elaine from this one little moment, Elaine admitting this. And at the same time, Elaine is just purely seeing this as nothing but a joke. Nothing more than that. The way she laughs after saying how she got that impulse and brushes off George's comment about her being filled with such sexuality. Oh, that was nothing. And her trying to change the subject. She's like, oh, well, so tell me about this bald thing. I mean, she doesn't see this as a big deal. There's no agenda to what she did except to just be a prankster and play a joke on Jerry, her friend. There's no agenda. There's no like, oh, I really hope the guys see me as sexy after this. It's just to mess with Jerry. The back and forth between Jerry and Elaine and that condescending explanation he gives her is great. Oh, Elaine. And then, like I said earlier, I love that little knowing look she gives to George. And just a little thing. I also love the way she says, bummer, when Jerry says the woman didn't leave her number. I just like the way she says that. Another genius part to this episode is to have Elaine shower at Jerry's place. So that little interaction where it's like, oh, look, unless I can just shower at your place. It's not a stretch. That's totally something very realistic that could happen. And now that we know George is seeing her in this very sexual way, the thought of her like naked in Jerry's shower, not far away from where he will be in the apartment. I mean, it's just a really strong way to advance this plot for George. And we see the effect it has on him with like that ice water glass to his forehead. And these are the things that I think are so genius about this episode, where they just present Elaine differently with her look. And then a shower, something as innocent as a shower, somehow now becomes a super sexy thing in George's mind. I think it's so well done. The next scene, we're in Jerry's apartment. Elaine enters in a very adorable robe, I have to say. George is still struggling. He's calling China. And Jerry says, "Why are you doing this?" And the timing and the blocking of this is so genius. Elaine bends over right in front of George, and he just, "Why do I do anything for women?" Kramer enters with the camera, of course. He's obsessed with this camera, and he says, "Just be yourselves." Oh, Elaine gets excited. "Ooh, you taping?" And they start this whole little kind of scene, little bit amongst themselves, a little friendly bit about Elaine being an adult film star. And this is the set of her new movie, Elaine Does the Upper West Side. And so they all get in on it. Jerry and Elaine get in on it. Jerry's the director. He sensed she had the anger and intensity needed to make this film work. And then Elaine just takes it over to George. "Follow me." Oh, he's an airline pilot who just returned from Rome, and I'm about to show him how much I've missed him. George is extremely uncomfortable. He's already distracted with his call to China. And the kicker, of course, it's always simulated. Except with George, that's in my contract. Ping enters with Kramer's food. George asks him to speak to the Chinese hair restoration clinic. And so Ping does him a favor. Finally, he gets the information he needs. Then Ping just keeps talking on the phone, and Jerry calls him out. Kind of an expensive call. The purpose of this scene, we're advancing all of the plots here. Elaine's being sexy. George is still trying to reach China, and Kramer is enjoying this camera he has. So my take on this scene, it's another scene that reveals Julia Louis-Dreyfus's versatility within the scope of Elaine. Again, I love seeing the playfulness of the friends together as well, with Jerry, Kramer, and Elaine specifically. The whole porn bit, it's very fun. And even though it's rare to see them doing this type of interaction where they're sort of doing like, I don't know, playing make-believe, I guess, it's not hard to believe that this would happen from time to time amongst themselves, their friends. I guess another time is maybe the Merv Griffin set where they just humor Kramer and pretend they're on a talk show set. So I really do like that little porn bit as a peek into their friendship and when they have fun like that. Jerry and Elaine really embrace the rules of improv here. I know you guys love hearing about improv. But yeah, there was a lot of yes-anding. Kramer initiated what everything was with the bit. And Jerry and Elaine just went along with it. And that's just super fun. Now, George cannot concentrate and honor the rules of improv because there's a China factor, and then Elaine, right next to him, fresh from the shower, probably smelling incredible, and pretending that they're not having simulated sex. Oh my gosh, and just whispering contract in his ear. It's so perfect. So perfect. And I have to say, I love the direction of seeing it through Kramer's camera with the black and white. It's so effective. And again, it's seeing Elaine a different way, and we have to see her in this way. And if it was just the typical wide shot or one of the angles from a 3-camera format, this wouldn't have worked. So really genius direction of seeing it through the camera with Elaine looking right into the lens. It just supports all of the heightening of her sexiness, which is really necessary to understand where George is coming from. Now, something super random I did. It's just something I always wondered, and I thought, well, why not do it for the podcast? I always wondered what Ping was saying on the phone in Mandarin. And so I looked up, I'm like, has anyone done this? And of course, on Reddit, someone had asked, can someone translate what Ping is saying on the phone? And so I found a little thread, and it says that someone responded saying their Mandarin isn't great, but when he first gets on the phone, he basically says he wants to buy some ointment for someone. And then he looks at George and says, yeah, he's really bald. And then he just translates the question George asks him and says, George will mail the money before he sits down. So when he sits down and he's just chatting, and that's when, Jerry kind of looks at his watch and tells him, hey, what are you doing? He's just saying stuff like he works in a restaurant, he was born in America, and stuff like that. So anyway, I was curious, what was Ping saying on the phone? And that's in a nutshell what he was saying. All right, moving on to the next scene. George and Elaine are in George's car. George has given Elaine a ride home, and he's very awkward and uncomfortable, but he wants her to stay. You're going. You're gonna go. And she's like, well, no. I mean, do you want to do something? And she's all for doing anything, really. And a little horn honk. Really good touch there. Then he just has to say, you were really good at that porno thing. Oh, yeah, I was just having fun. I thought the thing you said about the sex not being simulated, I thought that was really funny. Okay, George is creepy here. There's no getting around that. This is such uncharted territory for George. He doesn't know how to act. And Elaine's just kind of receiving it and saying, okay. Finally, he just can't take it. He says, I'll just speak to you through Jerry. Okay, bye. Just being near her, it's too much. George can't take it. And he's probably so conflicted in his head too, right? Thinking this is Jerry's ex-girlfriend and now I'm seeing her this way. It's torture for George. We know George is pretty neurotic, so it's not something he's just going to brush off. So the purpose of this scene, we see the impact of Elaine's prank on George. It's an unintended consequence. And my take, this is kind of an odd scene in the world of Seinfeld. I mean, everything from the tone to the way it begins even. So I guess I read in the notes about nothing, there was supposed to be a conversation at the end of the last scene where George offers Elaine this ride home. But they said that it was too awkward and really light on laughs. So instead, they opted to just kind of record an ADR of Elaine saying the line, "A ride home? What did I do to deserve this?" That would play over that exterior shot that we see. And in this scene, I mean, JLD and Jason Alexander, they're just masterful here. And I think this is a really great example of this comedic handing over of the baton. And what I mean is, look, there are two genius comedic actors in this scene. But one, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, is playing the straight man or a straight person, right? Like not the one to get the laughs or make the jokes. They're just sort of taking in the humor of the other person. I think Seinfeld does this all the time because especially with Michael Richards, Jason Alexander, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, just powerhouses in comedy, they have to do that. They all can't be at 100%. So I love when we see these scenes where she's clearly playing very normal, very grounded, and he's the one that's taking on the comedy. And I mean, I say taking on the comedy, it's not even really a heavy comedic scene, but the little that is in it is George's. You know, he's the one with the comedy part, like the awkward and creepiness. That's the comedy of it. The one line is super creepy. I thought that was really funny. So again, it's not necessarily a funny scene, but it was one that showed the actor's chops with taking a very real situation and having an interesting reaction about it. We need this scene to show the intensity of George's feelings. I liked the one-on-one between the two of them the first time they're alone together after George finds out she's on the tape. So the next scene, we're in Jerry's apartment. Jerry's on the phone. He's getting the number of the woman he thinks is on the tape recorder. I'm thinking it's maybe from the club manager or whatever, saying this is the woman that was sitting at the table where the tape recorder was. And we hear Jerry's Cockney accent. Not bloody likely. Kramer doesn't like it. And he's not bloody likely. Neither of them approve of the other's Cockney accent. George enters with a box. He got the bald cure from China. Kramer gets excited. Oh, well, another reason to use my camera. We can get a before shot. So while George is off putting on the bald cream, Kramer mentions something about a what? A what? A jacket. Yes, this jacket we've heard so much about. That was some intro music, I guess I just came up with. Jacket watch. All right. So jacket watch is something I'm doing. Every time a jacket is a predominant part of a plot or it's mentioned in an episode, I will talk about it and it'll be an installment in Jacket Watch. So this is our 4th installment, and this is carrying forward this ladies' man jacket that Kramer lost in the last episode. And it's an interesting runner of the series. This is something, one of the rare things that kind of has been sort of taken from episode to episode. We keep hearing about this fucking jacket. And for an episodic show, a show that's not a series where, oh, you don't have to watch one to understand what happens in the next one. This is episodic, so it's kind of standalone for each episode. But this jacket is getting a lot of attention, and it's the first of many jackets that get a significant plot in the series. But yeah, so 4th installment for Jacket Watch, thanks to Neil Brennan, who called out Seinfeld, saying that every time I watched this show, you guys were worried about a jacket. George returns. That bald stuff stinks. You stink. That always cracks me up when Kramer says that. Oh, stinks. You stink. Elaine calls. Hello, it's Elaine Marie Bennis. And George is excited. Hi, Elaine. He tries to get her attention. And she wants to know what's going on with the sexy girl. Well, Jerry got her number. Oh, wow. Guess you think you're in for a pretty wild night. Well, like I said, this type of thing's very common in show business. She offers to come over. She's at her friend Arlene's house. Yeah, sure, come over. George is just giddy. Did she say hello? Well, did you hear her say, I mean, it's polite to say hello. It's just like, Jerry's like, I don't know. Well, she's coming up. Well, he's coming up. George panics, runs to the bathroom. He certainly doesn't want to be stinky with this bald cream on his head when Elaine's there, only to have Elaine call back saying, you know what, I've got too much stuff to do. I'm not going to come, and wishes him luck on this sexy date that he thinks he's going to have. But she knows the truth. George comes back. They're like, is that it? I'm working on a system. Oh, Elaine's not coming over. Then he turns right back around, putting more bald cream on. Jerry calls the number. Hello, is this Alicia? The purpose of this scene, Jerry gets a woman's number from the club manager, and, he thinks it's the tape woman. George has the bald cream. It's arrived, and Kramer has a chance to get that magic ladies' man jacket back. My take, just specific to the Elaine portion, her phone call, I love that they show how beside himself George is when it comes to Elaine now. Just the saying hi on the phone and then panics when he thinks she's coming over and will see and smell the bald cream. He's like a schoolgirl. And, well, it's relatable to me. Kind of reminds me of my boy crazy days. Jason Alexander does it really well. The next scene, we're in Jerry's apartment after the date. Jerry comes in. Kramer is right behind him. He cannot wait to hear what this date was like. And Jerry's so confused. We're having a good time. I go in for a little contact. I get the bull back. Kramer thinks it's hilarious. He's laughing. So you blew it. She must be psychotic or something. Kramer wants the number. He knows how to press those buttons. George buzzes, super late, comes in with a cowboy hat on. Sheriff. Well, he's got the cowboy hat because that stinky bald cream is all over his head. And Kramer starts examining his head while George is telling Jerry, look, I have to talk to you about something. I get something off my chest. But George can't say it because Kramer's going to be back. Kramer needs to go get the camera. He thinks he sees something. And Jerry says, just start it. Come on, he gets lost over there. George blurts it out. He admits he's become very attracted to Elaine. Well, then, of course, Kramer comes right back in with the tape. Jerry says, really, Kramer, I need to speak to George. So finally, Kramer leaves and they start talking about it. Well, does she know? No. How did this happen? Well, I can't say. Why not? She asked me, but you just said she doesn't know. She doesn't. Very reminiscent of an Abbott and Costello routine. And then finally, George says, fine. It all started when I found out she was the one who spoke on your tape. I wasn't supposed to say anything. Jerry is just taken aback. That was Elaine? Elaine buzzes. She sounds a little desperate. Hi, is this a bad time? George, sort of like a cartoon run to the bathroom to get the stinkiness of that cream off of his head. While he's in there and Elaine's on her way up, Jerry's listening to the tape again. Oh, God. Oh, man. Oh, brother. Elaine enters and hears him. What's the matter? Oh, I have a pain on my side. George comes in and she says, hi, George. Something stinks in here. And George throws Jerry under the bus, gestures to him and says, yeah, he's a stinky one. And then Elaine just has to admit it. I was the one who talked into your tape recorder. I know, George told me. I mean, Jerry's just in a trance. And then she's just like, what, you told him? Well, he threatened me. Kramer comes back and I found a hair. And so George says, well, ever since I found out it was you on the tape, and Kramer gets distracted. Whoa. And he just says, Elaine, cannot believe that was you. She's standing there confused, like it was a joke. And they all are just looking at her in such a different way. And she says, I think I'm going to get going. And they were like, no, stick around. It's early. We'll order Chinese. So the purpose of this scene, it's a resolution to the tape mystery. Elaine reveals it was her and, sees the effect it had on all the guys. My take, I like the structure of this scene and how everyone enters separately into it. You know, first it's Jerry, Kramer rushes in right after him. Then George buzzes and Elaine buzzes. I just like the pacing of this scene. I think it's really well done and kind of building up to Elaine finally admitting, hey, it was me, and all of them finding out. It's super cringy when George admits he's attracted to her, and then Kramer's shock about it is great. Whoa! And that last shot of all the guys just gazing at her with these dreamy, googly eyes, I just love it. And how she's just like, I'm going to get going. These guys are nuts. It's, I think, a perfect ending to a really, really strong episode. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick break and I'll see you on the other side. I definitely thought they were inferior to me and people like me. That's how I was raised, I guess.
When I saw one of them moving in across the street from me, I'm ashamed to say my first thought was how our property values were going to drop.
I'll admit, I didn't think I was prejudiced because I was friends with a couple of them. But behind closed doors, I'd use slurs. I'd make offensive jokes.
Were you taught to think that people with hair were far superior to those who were follically challenged? Was bald a bad word in your house? Did you know that if you went bald, you were expected to wear a wig in order to be accepted by your family? If this sounds like your experience, it's time for you to go to Arby's. Reformed Baldists. With Arby's, you can melt away that hate and and replace it with love and acceptance. Reformed baldists won't judge your past participation in baldism. We simply educate you about all the hardships that bald people have gone through. We deprogram the lies and stereotypes you've been fed. You will hear from actual bald people and see for yourself how your privileged beliefs with your full head of hair has affected their community.
It was like a veil was lifted from my eyes. I cannot thank Arby's enough for giving me the chance to love people I was taught were lesser than me. We have more in common than most people think. A person cannot help if they're bald. I am proud to be an ally from the haired community. Just last year, I marched at the Bald and Bragging Parade. It was something I never thought I'd do in my life. My parents didn't understand, but they're from a different time. They have to find their own journey out of baldism. Contact your local Arby's restaurant, our proud sponsor, to inquire about your local Arby's chapter today. Every week, you can have the roast beef and become a reformed baldist. A life after baldism is possible. Just take it from the thousands of Arby's we've helped all over the world. Reformed baldists. We have the cure for that bald spot in your heart.
And we're back. With the extras, there was notes about nothing. That was all that was on the DVDs for this episode. And just out of that, one or two things really. In an early draft, there was a conversation between George and Elaine about the whole baldness cure. And George is kind of bitter about it. He said, I wouldn't have to do this if women weren't so superficial. And Elaine says, we're superficial. If women went bald instead of men, you'd put us in internment camps. Okay, we're living in a world right now where a lot of people are making comparisons to the Holocaust and internment camps and all that kind of stuff. So I don't support that portion of it, but I think the point being made here is George is completely wrong that the whole reason he's doing this is to blame women for their superficiality. So I support that. I don't support the comparison to an awful, awful time in our history. Okay, moving on. The tape was nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Writing in a Comedy Series and Outstanding Directing in a Comedy Series as well. All right, moving on to Contributor Corner. Greg sent in some thoughts this week. He says, this may be my favorite episode of the third season because it showcases Elaine's playful side and gives her more of a main storyline. Her finding it funny to play such a clever prank on Jerry is not something we'd seen anyone do to him, and the fact that he thinks it's a real fan gives us a new side to Jerry too. Normally a story like this would happen to George, and Jerry would be the sounding board of George trying to solve his problem. I also love how they never play her actual recording, so our imaginations are left to run wild with how filthy she got. I also find it funny how, like teenage boys, the guys respond to it, practically fighting to get to hear it. Yes, completely. And I really love what you said here, Greg, about this revealed a new side to Jerry as well. We're seeing just kind of like, this is what happens in show business. And to give this to Jerry versus George gives it such a new dynamic. And it's more believable that Elaine would do this to Jerry, right? So, and yes, the teenage boy's reaction, that's a lot of the fun of this episode. It's most of the fun of the episode, really. Next, Greg says, Elaine doesn't even show up until after the fact, and you see her for a moment trying to maintain composure when George brings it up at the diner. It's great that they had her confess to George, another sign of their side friendship from Jerry. She's so confident in her skills, the way she leans back in the booth. Oh, that was nothing, she says, as if she's the Meryl Streep of seductive voice acting. Nice Meryl Streep call out. Right. Yes. Everything is so true here. Yeah. This little side friendship, the Elaine George dynamic has so many sides and facets to it. And this is a great one that they showed in this episode. Next, Greg says, another scene I like is how she's acting sexy for Kramer and his camcorder. There's a word I haven't said in 20 years. And brings in George. It's so funny to see her playing this way and how uncomfortable it makes George since he's now completely turned on by her. Yes, love that entire sequence. You are right. Greg goes on to say, I also really enjoy the George subplot of trying to get the baldness cure from China. It's a great contrast with his biggest insecurity happening at the same time as his newest crush on Elaine. It's cringy how nervous he gets talking to Elaine in the car. You can see her realize that she probably should never have told him. Yeah, I didn't talk a lot about her reactions in the car. I think it's played really well by JLD, and the direction is done really well, where she's not completely creeped out, but she is a little bit like, I don't know what's happening here. And that George pulls back right away. I think he kind of realizes he stepped over a line when he says the thing you said about the sex not being simulated. I thought that was really funny. I think he, right away, he's like, so I'll just speak to you through Jerry and everything. I liked that switch, I guess, because he does get really cringy and creepy in that moment. But again, I like how it's played where, like I said earlier, Elaine's the straight man, the straight person. So it's just like, okay, I'm just reacting to what he's giving me. And what he's giving me is really picking up on some kind of awkwardness here. So I thought that was really well done. And lastly, Greg says, I like the ending of the three of them transfixed on her. It's a funny way to wrap it up, and that signifies that she sometimes isn't just one of the guys. I wonder how long after that she stayed away from them. That's a good point. Yes, I speak about this a little bit later in my final notes, but I like that she just says, I'm going to get going. I think she just knows, this is going to be temporary. You guys are such idiots. And I think it's a very realistic reaction because, again, they're embodying this teenage boy persona with arguing over the tape and trying to grab it from one another. So it's just very fitting at the end that they're all kind of transfixed, like you said. Okay, next we have Sheil. Sheil is my brother, for those of you who might not know, and he sent in some thoughts. He said, Seinfeld has so many hilarious lines that will make me laugh today like it's the first time I've heard them. But what is so funny about the tape is what you don't hear. The boys of Seinfeld are shocked to learn that the voice of the filthy-minded woman belongs to none other than their own friend, Elaine Bennis. The audience can't hear any of the X-rated material, but we can see the reaction on the faces of Jerry, George, and Kramer. But what I find interesting is that they were so shocked that Elaine could come up with thoughts so vulgar. For some reason, they don't see her in that way and don't see her as a three-dimensional person. This may be some meta commentary on how earlier in the show's history, the writers struggled to flesh out Elaine as a character. Ultimately, the show benefited from a more rounded out female lead who can be just as interesting as the male cast. Right. And so Sheil brings up something that Greg mentioned as well. We never hear the tape. And we shouldn't hear the tape. It's all about the reactions from George, Kramer, and Jerry. So that's the perfect move on, the director and the writer's side. And yes, I think Sheil brings up a really good point here. We're seeing another side of Elaine. This has been a slow process to kind of find who Elaine is. And like I said, sexy scheming Elaine is this new side to her. And while the audience is finding it out, the guys on the show are finding it out as well in this episode. They're like, what? It just was unfathomable to have Elaine be this vulgar in their eyes. They didn't see her that way. So yeah, it's all about seeing Elaine in a different light. And I like that the audience and the guys on the show are seeing it at the same time. And lastly, Sheil says, one moment in particular I loved from the show was when Elaine told George she was the woman on the tape. JLD's laugh was so genuinely full of delight in her prank. Yes, and I noted that as also the difference in how they perceived it, right? He's now perceiving this as, oh my God, she's such a sexual person. And she's just like, hey, aren't I just such a funny person and prankster? So that contrast to me was really, really well done. Thank you, Greg and Sheil, for those thoughts. If you would like to become a contributor to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine Bennis podcast, please email me at elainepodcast@gmail.com. That's elainepodcast@gmail.com. And your thoughts could be on a future episode. My favorite Elaine moments, well, the entire porn act into Kramer's camera, her commitment to it, the fun she's having, and look, she looks hot. Her hair's all down. She's in black and white. I can't lie. She looks super sexy. Okay, so my final notes. This was an episode, I know I've mentioned before that my family, we used to tape Seinfeld off of TV. So we had many VHS tapes that had Seinfeld episodes on them. So this was an episode I watched a lot on a VHS tape as a tween and an early teen. And it was the first time I had seen a woman who was so funny. I mean, I'd seen her do the Stella thing. That was, to me, was mind-blowing. This a woman being so funny. And then in this episode, seeing the same funny woman be so effectively sexy. And her sexiness, Elaine's sexiness, is not played for laughs. She's just sexy, full stop. I mean, the comedy comes from the men's reactions, like we talked about. We don't hear her recording, but we see their reactions to her playing this prank. And in this case, a prank is using her talent for raunchiness. And I just fucking love that. I love that this is a side we get to see of Elaine in this episode. I mean, watching this as a young girl, this whole episode blew my mind. And I remember thinking how seeing this side of Julia Louis-Dreyfus, like playing the sexual, sensual, sexy side, it in no way muted her comedic talents to me at all. In fact, it just impressed the shit out of me that she has this range, sexy scheming Elaine is just another weapon in her arsenal of comedy. And what a fun one to play with. Just so much fun. You can still be sexy and funny at the same time. And until then, I was trying to rack my brain going like, had I seen that before? Am I just forgetting? But I remember it being very impactful for me at that age to see this, because I felt like before I'd seen women in comedies and they were very much categorized into boxes, right? She's the funny one. She's the sexy one. She's the dumb one. She's the bitchy one. Whatever it was very like, okay, this is your role and this is what you're always going to be. This is what's always going to be on display for your character. And if a woman was the funny one, I don't ever remember them showing a sexy side, until it was maybe a bumbling portrayal of it. Like, oh, silly, funny lady, you can't be sexy. It was played for laughs if the funny girl was trying to be sexy. And so I was thinking of examples. So Three's a Company, which I've mentioned before, that show really, was kind of like my early education of sitcoms and comedy. So in that show, Janet was the sensible one. Chrissy was the sexy, dumb blonde. And both were funny in their own way, but only Chrissy was seen as the sexy one. In Gilligan's Island, Marianne was the girl next door, sweet one. Ginger was the sexy, sultry one. Very distinct characteristics. In Cheers, Diane was the love interest for Sam. So she wasn't going to be the one we looked to for comedy, but Carla was the unsexy female comic relief. And so rarely did these lines cross at all. So for me, this episode is a great demonstration. When you have an actress like Julia Louis-Dreyfus, fucking just let her play with this. This is so, look, it had such a great impact on me as a young girl going like, oh my God, she's so funny. Just a few episodes, I was cracking up watching her do this muscle relaxers like bit. And then now I'm seeing her be like really sexy and funny, but like in a grounded way because she's just seeing this as a prank. Like it really crossed so many lines I hadn't seen crossed before. And I'm so thankful for Seinfeld doing that. It makes a difference to young people like me at that time. And beyond that, I also recognized at such a young age that this was a commentary also on how easily men can be influenced by the charms of a woman. And it's oddly empowering. Like Elaine made these men putty, not David Putty, putty in her hands, and she did it accidentally. And like the whole episode is like the scenario of when you have a sexy dream about someone in your life that you're pretty much like neutral about in real life, but all of a sudden you can't look at them the same way because you had this like sex dream about them. This situation seems to go the same way with Elaine. And just as those dreams happen, it'll wear off and everyone goes back to acting like it never happened after a certain amount of time. Well, I think that's all I can say about the tape. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.